Hi everybody. So we have History and Approaches lesson 1.2. We're going to focus today on the psychological perspectives. So my objective for today is that you will be able to describe the different perspectives of psychology and the important subfields of psychology by taking notes and analyzing the causes of behaviors based on beliefs of the perspectives. The essential question for today is, what are psychology's level of analysis and related perspectives? This is a lot. You are going to fill in part of this chart. This chart talks about all the different perspectives of psychology. The perspectives of psychology are essentially when you take a behavior and you look at it from a different lens to try to explain why that behavior happened. This gives us a basic timeline of when these ideas started, and they are all still very influential today. As a matter of fact, if you look for a psychologist today, you can find psychologists that specialize in some of these different perspectives. Our third column are the principal contributors. These are the psychologists that made this perspective famous. Subject matter is essentially what is causing the behavior, right? And then the third or the last column, the basic premise, gives an explanation for that behavior. So behavioral perspective was studied by John Watson, Pavlov, and B.F. Skinner. I like to think of it as best friend Skinner. The subject matter was that the environment has an influence on our behavior for humans and animals. The basic premise is that only observable events, stimulus and response relations, can be studied scientifically. Okay, sorry, someone literally just knocked on my door. All right, so back to behavioral. They focus on rewards and punishment, and that's what shapes our behavior. So if you do something and get rewarded for it, you're going to do it again. If you do something and get punished for it, the idea is your behavior will change. Psychoanalytic is a second theory, started in about 1900s. Sigmund Freud really was the one that made it the most famous, but Carl Jung and Alfred Adler were also contributors. And they believe in this unconscious determines our behavior. So this idea that things happen to you when you develop in childhood. There's a lot of dream interpretations and dream analysis. So they're really going to focus on the way you develop in your early years, like the first few years of life, and that's going to determine what kind of a person you are. One example of this, my favorite, is the anal stage, and this is when you're learning how to be potty trained, and the people who just are okay with pooping and poop everywhere are the ones that are kind of sloppy and messy. That determines their behavior. And people who are like uptight and don't want to poop anywhere and hold it in are the ones who are more particular and quote unquote anal about the way that they do things in their behavior. Humanistic is the third perspective. 1950s, it became popular with Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. And this is the idea behind this is that we have unique aspects of human experience. And so that we are rational humans or rational beings, and that we can grow and we can change. And our goal is what we call self-actualization. And this idea of free will. So this idea that people can change no matter their circumstances, that we do continue to try to do things to make us better people. So the behaviors and things that we do are to make us better. We think of humanistic hippies. Cognitive, 1950s again, Piaget, Chomsky, and Simon. And this idea is thoughts and mental processes, and that our behavior cannot be fully understood without examining how we acquire, store, and process the information. We interpret, the interpretations of others' actions shape behavior and these schemas. So human behavior fits into these specific file folders or schemas of what behavior should be. Biological, 1950s again, Roger Sperry, James Olds, Hubble, and Wiesel. And they believe that there's a physiological basis of our behaviors. An organism's functioning can be explained in terms of the bodily structures and biochemical processes that underlie behaviors. So this might be, you might hear somebody say they have a chemical imbalance or your hormones are out of whack. That would all be this idea of biological and neuroscience. You could even say something as well as like when you're not feeling well, it might change your behavior. Evolutionary was in the 1980s, and this is by David Buss, Martin Daly, and Margot Wilson. And there was an evolutionary basis of behavior in humans and animals, and that behavior patterns have evolved to solve adaptive problems. Natural selection favors behaviors that enhance reproductive success. So kind of this idea that our behavior evolves so that we can continue to reproduce. And so whatever might give us the best chance of that is the behaviors that we follow or the behaviors that we do. Sociocultural, 1986 to the present, and this is Vygotsky. And higher order functions develop out of social interactions. And this proposes that children learn behavior through problem-solving interactions with other children and adults. Through these interactions, they learn the values and norms of their society. So when they have an interaction, that's how they learn their behavior. They may watch something or see something, and depending on how that works for them, that's whether or not that behavior will continue. I actually like to think of this one a lot with my own children. You know, if my daughter and her friends are playing and they're not getting along over something simple or fighting over arguing over something very simple, a lot of times I let them just kind of figure it out for themselves. And this idea of the social cultural, that's how she learns how to behave, and that's how she learns how to work with her friends and problem solve with her friends. This is just a brief overview of all these perspectives. We are going to go into greater depth on all of these throughout the entire year. So this is just kind of give you a general overview. If you need a better explanation to any of these, I recommend going into your book or even looking it up online because there's so much for each one of these. Again, this was just a very, very brief, simplistic explanation for each thought process. Subfields in psychology. As I said, you'll find all these perspectives can influence psychologists, but psychologists also decide to practice in different fields. So not all psychologists are the same where you're laying on a couch talking and somebody's just sitting there listening to you. There's a variety of different kinds, and throughout the year I hope to take you guys on a lot of experiences to get a better understanding for them. The most popular is clinical psychology. But we also have a lot of other fields, which could be counseling, school psychologists, developmental psychologists, educational psychologists, social personality psychologists, industrial organizational psychologists, biological and experimental psychologists, and then other psychology. For example, you have sports psychology is another subfield of psychology. I'm not going to go into these. I just want you to know they exist. What you are going to do is you're going to pick two of those subfields. You're going to go to this website, the Ohio University, website, and they have all of the subfields with descriptions. I want you to pick two that you think are interesting and just take a closer look at those two. And that is it for today.